There are no streets and no hospital. Graves cannot be buried but are covered with rocks. Brenda Dolmer writes, she writes to me, by the way. When I say she writes, we're exchanging emails, and you're going to hear her part of the email exchange. So she says, everything is weather dependent. We arrived by helicopter, $800 round trip from Nome on January the 4th. Our mail did not arrive until January the 23rd. I started mailing boxes of food in November to be sure I had all our food for my teaching contract. It's important that people come prepared to have food for much longer than anticipated. Last year the helicopter was not able to get to Diomede for a variety of reasons for over 6 weeks. People have to get permission to come to Diomede. There are no accommodations. The store has very expensive and limited canned goods. At this time, I have 8 elementary students for drama, an after-school activity once a week for an hour. They have been introduced to the ideas of warm-ups, simple theatre games, and will explore a very simple script. My plan is to take them through auditions so the roles can be cast, then they will memorise their parts and we will present the simple play in 1 month or so. Okay, so this is little Diomede here. Behind the ancient settlement looms the larger island, Tomorrow Island. The larger Tomorrow Island, its Russian counterpart. So, America, Russia. Okay. The separation of Yesterday Isle and Tomorrow Island points to a pivotal moment in the history of globalized capital, when longitudinal carving up of the Earth's surface made a system whose zero was London, Greenwich Mean Time, right? This is the dateline here, international dateline. So, okay. So this is 12 hours behind London, and this is 11 hours in front of London. So it's almost 24 hours apart from each other. Okay, so, oh, hang on. Okay, so I said that this division of these places points to a pivotal moment in the history of globalized capital. Okay, so it was a decision concerning markets and economy, why these places were divided up. So if we look at the word capital and capitalism, a word that's probably going to get used all week as well, capitalism is an economic system based on private ownership of the means of production. This might mean factories, farms, or property development, and their operation for profit. So it's saying owners of factories can make money out of the factories. Characteristics central to capitalism include private property, capital accumulation, this means they can get money, wage labour, which means workers have wages, voluntary exchange, a price system, and competitive markets. In Capital, a very significant book by Karl Marx, which lays down the structures for the frameworks in which capitalism operates, Karl Marx proposes that the motivating force of capitalism is the exploitation of labour. Less wages, whose unpaid work, and this could mean low paid work, is the ultimate source of surplus value. So Karl Marx is saying less wages means more profits for people who own factories, right? Obvious, right? Okay. The owner of the means of production is able to claim the rights to surplus value because he or she is legally protected by the ruling regime. This means capitalism is legal across most of the world through property rights. A historical section of the book shows how these rights were acquired in the first place, and that was chiefly through plunder and conquest and the activity of the merchant and the middleman. So we're talking about colonialisation, which I think Clement will talk about probably, I imagine, next as well. Greenwich, 0. This is the Greenwich Mean Time, or the Coordinated Universal Time. And in The Secret History of Longitude by Josephine Livingstone, she says that the primary standard by which the world sets its clocks was made because of agreements at the International Meridian Conference of 1884. So basically, a group of men, probably white men, were in Washington, and they were arguing, actually not just white men, but the ones who got their way were the white men, and they said, we need to standardise the times of the entire planet so that everything ticks to what Greenwich, the time is in Greenwich, right? Why, you might ask. So this is a very serious moment in the history of modernity, pointing to a global grid whereby the spatial and durational units could be measured in relation to Greenwich at the time, who had an enormous empire that spanned the entire globe. This conference was the brainchild of Sandford Fleming, and he was an engineer born in Scotland, and he moved to Canada when a lot of people moved to Canada to kind of develop land which was predominantly agricultural, and he was like big into mapping and developing train tracks and this kind of stuff. And during his lifetime he witnessed the advent of the telegraph, the telephone, electric lighting, the refrigerator and the camera. But he devised the conference to debate the regulation of time and to adopt a pole that covers half of the world, pole to pole, connecting points of longitude equivalent to London. This Eurocentric and universalised time was highly controversial among delegates. For example, representatives from the Ottoman Empire, now Turkey, were documented as arguing that the majority... here's that grid played out across the world. And they say, the majority of our population is agricultural, working in the fields and prefer to count to sunset. Besides, the hours for Muslim prayers are counted from sundown to sundown. What could a straight line running through London have to do with temporally inflected religious cultures of other countries? So, Brenda Dahmer says her drama class keeps pace with the rest of the USA. She writes, logistics are a challenge. Everything is weather permitting. The last day of school is May the 17th. Due to time zones, it might be good to start the first questions, then set up a Saturday or Sunday to Skype or FaceTime. So we're trying to arrange a way we can actually communicate with each other, not just via email. If you've ever been in communication with someone living in a different time zone, you will agree that there is a certain strangeness of Skyping, not only across space but across time, into a different now. You're talking face to face with the dark while you're in the light. It's an experience of profound asynchrony, an experience of simultaneous non-simultaneity. The FaceTime is out of joint. These feelings stem from fundamentally contemporary experiences. They are the result of cheap travel and free telephonies flinging us out of time, through space. Jet lag too is asynchrony incarnate. The unpleasant somatic, that means physical, repercussion of moving unnaturally fast through space in the wrong time, into the wrong time. Okay. So, Josephine Livingston also writes that Greenwich Mean Time didn't come out of any top-down dictum from Queen Victoria, who was the head of the British Empire at the time, or transparent mutual agreement between the world's nations, but Sandford Fleming's sleight of hand. It was all about money. Transnational investors who used or misused the conference to synchronise countries precisely to coordinated capital flow. Universal time came to be required as a commercial tool, but universal time also synced the world's markets together, greatly advancing the connectivity and thus the sophistication of international commerce. The conference is a milestone in the history of globalised capital. Okay. So, there's one problem, which is that at the edge of this side of the map, from USA back to Russia over there, is an interruption of an entire day. Little Diomede, its very existence, insists that the flow of capital is not complete. Yesterday Island, tomorrow Island mark not only a separation of a whole day, but the islands between which nomadic tribes have moved freely for 3 millennia are in the last 150 years separated geopolitically, and the crossing of USA into Russia or back without documentation, which is hard to get, would mean an international state offence. In 2008, I don't know if any of you can remember this, the US presidential election, which seems like absolutely a sort of breeze compared to what we've been through. Sarah Palin was kind of a very far-right vice presidential candidate, and she was the senator of Alaska or the governor of Alaska, and she famously said, "I can see Russia from my house," and this kind of made her a bit of a laughing stock. So she said like the reason that she's so close to Russia that this puts her in like this uniquely useful place for foreign policy for America, because she can see what they're up to at all times, right? And CNN did a little investigation into this claim, and I'm just going to play you their video. They're being a bit mean. So anyway.
Well, Senator Palin often cites the proximity of...
Sorry, that is just too much, isn't it? It just, yeah. Thank you.
Well, Senator Palin often cites the proximity of Russia as a reason she has foreign policy experience. So here's what she told Katie Couric on that subject.
Have you ever been involved with any negotiations, for example, with the Russians?
We have trade missions back and forth. We do. It's very important when you consider even national security issues with Russia, as Putin rears his head and comes into the airspace of the United States of America. Where do they go? It's Alaska. It's just right over the border. It is from Alaska that we send those out to make sure that an eye is being kept on this very powerful nation, Russia, because they are right there. They are right next to our state.
Well, we thought we'd send Gary Tuckman to actually find the spot where Russia is right next to our state, where you can see Russia. It's a small, remote island. There it is on the map. His residents are, frankly, somewhat surprised to suddenly be in the headlines. Gary Tuckman is there. Gary.
This is the island, a piece of Alaska that Governor Sarah Palin cites as evidence of her foreign policy experience. No streets, no cars, no airstrip. A helicopter is the only practical way to get here. Nome is the nearest city on the mainland. Anchorage, 550 miles away.
This is the city of Diomede, Alaska, on an island known as Little Diomede, about 25 miles off the western Alaska coast. This is basically a rock plopped in the Bering Sea. Only about 150 people live on the entire island. There are no hospitals, no hotels, no restaurants. And what's most unique about it is this. This is the Bering Sea, the Bering Straits. A half mile in front of me is the international date line. And this rock in front of me, that is the nation of Russia. Right now it's Tuesday afternoon in the United States. There in Russia, it's Wednesday afternoon.
The smaller island in front is Little Diomede, and then the division between western and eastern hemispheres, with Russia's big Diomede Island only 2.5 miles behind it. Since World War II, it's been a Soviet and now Russian military installation. 20 miles in the background, you can see the Russian Siberian mainland.
Okay, well, you can pick the ones without the check marks.
85 students in the Little Diomede school may be in the United States, but Russia dominates their view. And yes, you can see it from every house. Is Big Diomede in the United States of America? Where is it?
Russia.
Governor Palin may be talking about this island, but she has never been here. Patrick Oniak is the tribal chief of the Native Alaskan community on Little Diomede.
Since Alaska's been a state, which is almost 50 years next year, have you had a governor come visit here?
No.
The only statewide politician ever to come here is current U.S. Senator Ted Stevens. So regarding Sarah Palin,
she's making a comment that she shouldn't have made in the first place about seeing Russia. She said it came out here beforehand, then made the comment.
While some here feel Sarah Palin is doing a good job as Alaska governor, others are nowhere near getting swept up in her new national fame. What's the governor's name?
Sarah Palin.
There is no television on Little Diomede Island, so many here don't keep up with the news.
Did you know that she was picked by John McCain, who's running for president, to be the vice president of the United States, possibly?
No, I did not know that.
Diomede Mayor Andrew Milligrak does know of her, but does not believe that Russia's proximity to Alaska provides foreign policy experience.
Has this governor, Palin, or any other Alaskan governor, ever said to the mayor of this city, we need to work hand in hand in dealing with the Russians if A happens or if B happens?
No.
Never happened?
No.
No discussions with the state capital about that?
No.
In fact, nobody we talk with here feels threatened with Russia being about the same distance from them as the White House is from the U.S. Capitol. The Palin campaign defends the way the governor deals with this foreign policy issue.
Her experience as CEO of the state is unlike many others, and her experience as CEO of the state with regard to international affairs is like any other governor, including Governor Ronald Reagan.
Okay, that's quite interesting that they call her the CEO as well, given the conversation about globalization. You know, that a political candidate is now given like a marketing or business title instead of a political title. So Palin emphasizes that Alaska is the home front from which to guard against Russia. Similarly, on the Russian side, actually the only occupants of the island are now border control, and they are armed, and they are pointing at America, supposedly. And the only people who would want to cross are the Inupiat people, whose families and communities were divided after World War II, which is relatively recently, considering that they've been there for 3,000 years, or they've been migrating around the region for 3,000 years. So, I mentioned that there's this kind of punctuation in this flow, this global flow, and it's because of this geographical separation. Initially proposed in 1905, a kind of vision or a project to create a bridge between these land masses called the Bering Strait Land Bridge has been proposed by both America and Russia, and it has been on and off the cards for the entire 20th century. And the connection would either be via a tunnel or a land bridge, and would go directly through those tiny islands, so across that bit over the top, and then it would actually go through those kind of rocks. So I'll just play you.
With the very initiation of Nawapa in North America, politically and economically, the land connecting the continents of America and Eurasia is placed on the agenda. The connection via the Bering Strait, a project that was proposed in the middle of the 19th century, would lead highways and rail track through a tunnel underneath the icy ocean waters, and would include a gas pipeline as well as power transmission and communications lines. Construction of the Bering Strait Tunnel is an active agenda of many of the most important nations in that region.
Now, with a bridge or tunnel across the Bering Strait, suddenly that rail route that goes up to Alaska means something else entirely. Suddenly, if you talk about continuing that rail into what Mr. and Mrs. LaRouche have been calling for as the Eurasian Land Bridge, you're talking about connecting rail all the way from South Africa up through the continent of Africa, up through Central Asia, through Asia, Russia, across the Bering Strait, down through North America, down through South America. Once we've solved the problem of crossing the Darien Gap, all the way down to the southern tip of Argentina. So suddenly, all these cities that were once the middle of absolute nowhere become the centers of human culture.
So cities that were once in the middle of absolute nowhere, this is what he considers these places. Is that strictly true? Do we think that's true? How about the Inupiat people who've whaled there seasonally for 3,000 years? The Bering Strait Tunnel, deemed the physical as well as political and economic linchpin of the four-power agreement between USA, India, Russia and China, who I think are the top four sort of superpowers of the planet in terms of growing economies, would re-stimulate this land bridge would re-stimulate manufacturing industry, creating many jobs and giving purpose for development. For a country like America, who was once manufacturing so many cars and other exports, the proponents for this new land bridge say that it would create an entirely new paradigm. And a paradigm is like a whole new set of ways of thinking about the world. So it will have this immense psychological effect as well as economic effect. And there's one other little clip of someone speaking from that same video. This video is from 2010, so I was worried it's kind of out of date and they're not still talking about it, but there's another video that was made in 2016, and I kind of think that given Trump and his special relationship with Putin, like, it wouldn't be surprising if this conversation gets brought up and brought up and brought up until it actually happens. But anyway.
First of all, we have to really understand distribution of different resources on the way we are going to build. Without that, it will be like fifth leg for a dog. We have to really understand what will be transported through this railway or infrastructure corridor, either through tunnel or through bridge. So, first of all, distribution of human resources, of mineral and other resources. Second, first stage actions. I don't want to go into technical complications. Also, there is a lot to say about permafrost, there is a lot to say about mountains on the way, but if we start with healthy thinking, we have a chance to accomplish it healthy.
Okay, so against mounting scientific and environmentalists' opinions, Cherkasov, who's the man speaking, advocates for more mining. Now, I don't know about you, but our alarm bells ringing, haven't we heard that our planet is dying and it's greatly to do with over-mining? Is mining a solution to these problems? I'm not sure, but he's talking about using these rail networks to mine certain resources in certain places and to basically so that somewhere like Siberia can be this kind of storeroom for the rest of the world. I guess that would depend on diplomatic relationships between Russia and the rest of the world, but anyway. So he's saying we have only just scratched the surface on the world's mineral deposits and we have discovered just a thin film of resources. But the plan to bridge this gap or complete this flow in capital has been hailed by some as a lifeline for mankind, but it would turn these islands into a corridor. So, Brenda Dahmer says, the best thing about being in Diomede is the opportunity itself to be in such a remote place and have time to experience it. I'm having to learn to slow down and be present. There is no restaurant. You most likely read about the Tex-Mex place in Barrow, but it burned down last year. There is a job placement service for Alaska teachers. I noticed in October they were looking for a teacher and phoned. To my knowledge, the kids have not done drama. There are 19 students in the whole school. 6 are the very little guys, kindergarten. The students have basketball most days, so I'm up doing drama once a week for an hour with whoever shows up. We have been doing warm-ups, theatre games, and hopefully we'll get to memorisation, developing their characters. I'm not sure if anyone in the community even knows or cares about the Bering Strait Land Bridge project. I actually had to look it up. Because oil prices have declined in the state of Alaska, the state of Alaska is in huge budget decline. From my observation, the bigger issues include, can the helicopter come into land? And is there a health aid? I can't answer what people in the community do to socialise, as there is a separation between the community and the school. The kids, if they behave, get to have open gym many days a week, and Friday they get evening art. There used to be Eskimo dance, and there was one last week at the winter feast, which my husband and I were able to attend. There is a time slot for Eskimo dance during school once a week, but until the community steps up and shows up, the principal has put it on hold. If you decide to come, that's to me, you'll need to be prepared to stay a while and bring all your own food and your sleeping bag, etc. The helicopter has only 3 flights a month scheduled. Last year there was no service for over 6 weeks. People were either stuck here or couldn't get back. You have to have the time should you get stuck, and all the supplies for a long time, even if you plan to stay on only a couple of days. The whole community is less than 2.5 acres, so you can't really go very far. My husband and I try at least to get outside even once a day, even if it's just walking to the helipad, which is less than 100 yards from school. The wind blows all the time between gale force and hurricane force, or should I say since we've arrived. My school day starts at 8 a.m, my leaving the classroom where we are living in and going to the library next door where I'm teaching. I have one high school student in the morning for 3 classes. The school district has something called a pacing guide that we're to complete for specific lessons on specific days. In the afternoon I have 4 different students that I assist on catching up their reading skills. Every student gets free breakfast and free lunch. I hope this helped. Sorry, that was quite a long email actually. Okay, so Here she is, Brenda with her students. Little Diomede has been inhabited seasonally for it is estimated 3,000 years, as I say. For most of the history, Eskimos were nomadic people. Different tribes would meet and intermingle, expanding the gene pool. In the 1800s, new American settlers set up whaling companies along the Bering coastline and began trading with whalers in exchange for money. Settlers also brought with them alcohol and sexually transmitted diseases. In around 1885, the same year as the universal time was agreed in this conference, Western missionaries came to civilize the Inuits and cure them of their new drinking habits. Native children were forced to attend missionary schools where they were taught traditional Christian values. Natives were punished for speaking their own dialects and were no longer allowed to pursue the traditional means of survival. School attendance also made it difficult for Eskimos to migrate in search of food, and they were not allowed to hunt on a Sunday. With nomadic tribes transformed into isolated villages, inbreeding became a serious problem, and ambivalence towards the imposed education means populations were not informed as to the genetic implications and risks associated with living in a small community over generations. Okay, this is the gym on the island. I'll just play this clip. Okay, so the school building is the central meeting place for the community and all social activities, including funerals, tribal council meetings, parties and traditional Eskimo dance ceremonies, in which dancers perform moves choreographed from actions from everyday life, like harpooning, don't know if you could recognise any of this from his dancing, harpooning, skinning and hunting, to extremely loud drumming. Brenda Dahmer mentions that there is a decline in popularity for such activities. Anthropologists write that dances are about making social bonds and about synchronizing moves and working collaboratively. The throat chanting you heard right at the beginning existed as a way for these people to warm up, like it was to sort of hyperventilate, or like to, that particular throat chanting was like actually a way of like getting warm. And it was actually a competitive game, and that was their submission to the 2008 Olympics. So I guess my question is, what does it mean for the rituals like dancing and throat chanting to coexist with the formalized education that Brenda is teaching from the USA? Brenda mentions that in her drama sessions, her young pupils are developing character. And I guess this is according to the USA syllabus. Are these skills useful to eventually find work in the mainland of America? Because when we learn drama at school, it's not always to become famous actors or professional actors, it's to develop performance skills, like social skills, to become kind of good workers eventually, you know? So she's teaching these skills that could be adapted to work in the mainland of America, but does that move necessitate a decline in the population on the island itself? So should these kids be maintaining skills particular to life in the Arctic? Or perhaps their future won't be like our future, or be like their past, but it will be like their future. So, globalization, American spelling and the English spelling. So, is the process of international integration arising from the interchange of worldviews, products, ideas and other aspects of culture. Advances in transportation, such as the steam locomotive, the steamship, the jet engine and container ships, and in telecommunications infrastructure, including the rise of the telegraph, which is those big columns, poles that you have cables on to do phone lines, and its modern offspring, the internet, and mobile phones have been the major factors in globalization, generating further interdependence of economic and cultural activities. Brenda writes, I drove up the Alcan at 21 with the promise of a job. I've had the goal to see Alaska, and I've been doing that for 35 years. It's always more expensive to travel in Alaska than elsewhere. I'm already in the countdown with 98 days remaining. I am not planning on returning after summer. Rural life is very complex, with issues of alcohol and drugs, loss of culture, welfare, loss of elders, the impact of climate change, pollution, and ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. The divide of school and community comes from this. Teachers feel they can educate whoever is in front of them. I have to add, if they are willing and able to learn, that is a different issue. The sense of hopelessness, not caring, nothing matters, or nothing makes a difference creates a challenge to teach. Keep me posted. So it seems difficult to talk about globalization without mentioning this guy, Donald Trump. And this is one article which is in response to why it's possible for someone like Donald Trump to gain popularity. And he says that although America has lost so much of its industry due to outsourcing, which is a result of globalization, where cheap labour and cheap resources were able to be sourced elsewhere, often in the southern hemisphere, not in the northern hemisphere, that a lot of industry, or the majority of industry, like car manufacturing, was able to happen overseas. Because prices were continuously needing to be driven down, and therefore this has led to like this mass unemployment in what is called the Rust Belt. And Trump has like really focused on the Rust Belt and said, if you get me in, we'll rebuild the train tracks, you'll have jobs, but by the way, I'm really racist. And so, but Paul Mason says it's not just that the white working class are disenfranchised and that they're pissed off and they want their jobs back, but actually there's a more deep-seated sort of sense of entitlement, and that might be misogyny, like a disbelief that women can suddenly be in powerful positions, or racism, and this, or sort of prejudices against LGBT communities or whatever. And this comes from a problem with the idea of neoliberalism, which is the idea that anyone can rise to the top, and that has proved not possible for these people, and this is what his argument is anyway. But I thought with that it'd be useful to go back to Karl Marx and think about capital. So he says, the motivating force of capitalism is the exploitation of labour, where unpaid work, or low paid work, is the ultimate source of surplus value. Less wages, more profits. The owner of the means of production, factories, etc., is able to claim the right to this surplus value because he or she is legally protected by the ruling regime, because capitalism is legal across most of the world, through property rights. A historical section of the book shows how these rights were acquired in the first place, and this is chiefly due to plunder and conquest, and the activity of the merchant and middlemen. Okay. And then a sort of second summary, I guess, is to think about how maps have actually changed the shape of the world. So this is a map of the former British Empire. And this used to be in classrooms, like when our parents' generation were in schools, I guess. So where you'd have, or maybe my parents, not yours, but like pink, black, like the whole world atlas is just completely covered in, they use pink to describe the British Empire at the time. This is slave trade routes between 1400s and 1800s. This is a map inflated to show populations and deflated to show low populations. So Russia at the top, which is the biggest country geographically in terms of land mass, is now like this thin slither, and China is overpopulated. England's the UK is very fat up there. This is a map to show harvesting of cotton and rayon. This is a map to show transportation of goods, liquids, gas, vehicles. This is a map to show optic fibre cables under the sea. So who's connected to broadband internet, basically, which is very political, of course. A map to show routes taken by asylum seekers to the UK or to the EU and refugees. And I don't know if any of you saw, there's like a reconstruction video made on an iPhone about the kind of path a refugee might have to make, and it's kind of like, have you seen this, anyone? It's like a video and it comes up and saying like, from the parents saying like, are you okay? And then like, there's like videos of them crossing seas and this kind of stuff. And this idea that the iPhone or the smartphone is actually a tool that can facilitate safer travel, like in these kind of emergency times. So this sort of mapping is the means, and also the maps changed as a result of this kind of migration. And then finally, this map just won the Good Design Award in October 2016. I don't know if you can notice any differences to the maps we've been seeing so far. Can anyone see anything? The orientation has shifted. Normally we have Greenwich Mean Time in the middle, and then this change of the day on the sides, but this architect is Japanese, which is here, and the intention of this map is to show more accurately the North and South Pole, which are melting, as we know, which is a problem for climate change, a problem for the planet, like on an ecological basis, but actually I'm not sure whether this map's kind of designed to enable people who are chartering new shipping routes for trade to be able to more accurately mark out where the ships will travel. So like by 2050, I think container ships will be able to go straight over the North Pole. So, you know, it's worth knowing exactly what that looks like now, properly accurately. But so that will be useful if all of the world's capital cities and economic centres aren't underwater. Anyway, so there we go. But yes. But this is, I mean, this, I feel like I should show you. There's this map was made, where's it gone? This map was made by, each landmass was plotted onto triangle, like tessellating triangles, and was laid out more carefully. So the South Pole's a different shape, Brazil suddenly extremely pointy, and this is kind of like more topographically accurate than any map has been previously. And we've been working off the same map since like 1570, I think, up until now. So anyway, yeah, I think that's it.